I'm going to be talking to you today about why art is important to learning and overall well-being. I'm going to start off with a quote, and the quote is by Pablo Picasso, which is a famous artist. He's one of my favorites. And the quote is, "Every child is an artist. The problem is to remain an artist once they grow up." This is so powerful and it resonates with me so strongly. When I think about it, when I look at kids from the ages of 0 to 5, just think about how they learn. They experiment, they explore, they play. They don't think about what people think about, what we think about. They just play. They just love the fact that they're learning through that. And so when I think about this, I think about my own children. And when I give them a paintbrush, they don't care that it's just like a messy brown blob. They love the fact that they're just exploring and experimenting. And I find that once students start going into school and they start being institutionalized, that's what happens, is that we start telling them, you have to color in the lines, and you can't color that kangaroo green, it has to be brown. So our perception on what is good filters down into them, and it hinders that process, it hinders that love for learning, it hinders that love for art. And it's something that I'm so passionate about, is art, because it's just something that everyone can access. But unfortunately, what happens is that students and children start to focus on the end product. So this is what I was talking about with little children from ages of 0 to 5. They care about the process of art. They enjoy that process. But as soon as they go from like 5 onwards, they care more about the end product. And that's what hinders that love for art. So we'll just go to the next slide. Art is the underdog of our curriculum. I could not agree more with this, because it's just like it says it perfectly in this quote. The argument is that art is an integral part of human existence, that it is imperative nature is seamlessly woven into our neurofabric is virtually no argument at all. We're innately artists. History suggests it, and our continued attraction to symmetry, abstraction, colour swatches, and fashion confirms it. Why then has our current educational paradigm positioned art near the bottom rung of our learning ladder? I think that's pretty powerful. And it is. But the reality is, the things that we are facing at the moment is that parents see it as unimportant. And this is a cultural thing, and I guess it's a universal thing. And it's maybe like a generational thing as well. But students focus on the end product rather than the process, which hinders the joy of art making. That's what I was saying before. Teachers need to be more theoretical and practical understanding of the arts, and I think this is really important, and not just in the arts, it's also in things like dance, in drama, in PE, it's all of those things. I don't think that we learn a lot at uni to be able to fully and confidently teach those subjects. So I think really getting an understanding about these subjects properly can really help with our teaching. With education's obsession with data, art is one of those subjects that you cannot quantify. I don't like looking at an artwork and saying that's an A, because my opinion of something, my opinion of an artwork would be different to your opinion. And how am I and who am I to go up to an artwork and say that's an A? It's just not possible. So that's something that I'm really passionate about. You just can't quantify art into numbers. So I think that's a challenge, especially in the education/art world. And resources will always be a challenge. Art is a very expensive subject to teach. We have things like clay, kiln making, we've got so many different things, and they're all very expensive. So it is and it will always be a challenge in every school that you go to. Okay, so I'm not going to go through each point, but this is why art is important. You've got fine motor skills. How many kids do we see in year 5 and year 6 that their handwriting is shocking? And that's the truth. When you hold a paintbrush and you give them that experience, you're building their fine motor skills, and you're doing it in a fun way. You're not giving them, here you go, here's some handwriting, go and do that, that's going to help you. This is more of an engaging way to get them to build up those fine motor skills. Language development. When we talk about artworks, when we're able to describe colour, when we're able to describe the composition of an artwork, the way that things are positioned and describing it properly, you're building up vocab. And that's something that I think that we all need to be addressing with our students, is that increasing that vocab, getting them to speak more in a sophisticated way, using like symbolic language and really thinking deeper. We've got decision making. When you are making an artwork, you are constantly making a decision. Every single minute you are making a mistake. Like when we were making the masks, what happened was we did paper mache and we painted them, then the paint cracked. And we were like, me and the kids were like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So I was like, we had to Google it and find out what else we had to use. So we had to use gesso. It's just constant decision making, and it's just, like we always talk about maths being a decision maker, but we forget about art being one of those subjects that really enhances decision making skills. Visual learning. When you're drawing, sculpting with clay and threading and doing all of those things, you're building up visual spatial skills, which is now more important than ever with our world that we live in. It's just so visual. We've got inventiveness. We need our kids to be risk takers, to think outside the box. We don't want conformists. And our vision statement says that we want our students to be critical and be independent and be leaders. Well, if you want them to be that, then we need to encourage them to be risk takers and inventive and to think creatively and think outside the box. Culture awareness. They can learn so much about culture by just looking at an artwork. They can learn about history by looking at an artwork. There's so much to be said about those artworks that come from different countries. Okay, why art is important to mental health. I feel so strongly about this. Headspace has revealed an alarming new data on the levels of psychological distress among young Australians. The research released on the third annual Headspace Day as part of National Mental Health Week. Nearly 1 in 3, 32% young Australians, 12 to 25-year-olds, are reporting high or very high levels of psychological distress, more than the treble rate in 2007, which was 9%. We have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? We're the educators in schools. Why is this happening? And I don't think there is enough emphasis on well-being in schools at the moment. That's just the honest truth. That's my honest truth. So activities like painting, sculpting, drawing, photography are relaxing and rewarding. It really encourages students to express themselves and to be them, like without any kind of barrier. Like they can be who they want to be. And that's really powerful. And I think especially at that age where it's so vulnerable, they need that. And art provides a distraction, giving your brain a break from your usual thoughts. And I think this is pretty important, especially for those kids that come from dysfunctional families. They need a distraction from that. And art can be a therapy. Creating art increases the feel-good neurotransmitter dopamine, and dopamine has been called the motivation molecule. This boosts drive, focus, self-esteem, and concentration. And I'm doing this now with my own practice, my own art practice, is people with 100 or more hours per year of arts engagement, so that's 2 hours per week, had significantly better mental health and mental well-being and lower stress levels. And I think that's pretty important, and I see this in my own life as well. Okay, so teaching visual literacy. This is something that's pretty important in our time right now, because right now our world is full of advertising, it's full of constant media. Social media is really, really prevalent at this time in our society. So we need our students to be able to read artworks and read visual information in a critical way. We don't want them to be manipulated by what they see. So the basic definition of visual literacy is the ability to read, write, and create visual images, both static and moving. So I'm not going to go into the rest of the definition because it's pretty self-explanatory. It's being able to critically understand an art, like a piece of visual information, an artwork, whatever that may be. So these are some of the questions that, if you came for a tour at an art gallery, this is the kind of questions that we would ask. So we would say, what can you see? Describe the colors. What is the mood presented in the artwork? How does it make you feel? And what do you think the artist is trying to express in this artwork? So those are the questions that I would ask my students when I'm presenting them with an artwork. And it gets them to build vocab, the visual spatial skills. It gets them to really look at the artwork in a way where they're really reading it properly. All right, why visual literacy is vital in this modern world. This is why. I don't really need to explain this any further because this is why it is important. When you give a child a Barbie, they already think that this is the standard of beauty because it's just they're constantly consumed and it's just mass production constantly. You've got this stuff where it happens on a train station, where you've got a movie being presented next to alcohol. We need our students to be able to go, that's not right, or I'm not going to be sucked into that or manipulated by that. Instagram, a world full of comparison where you're constantly comparing yourself to other people and everything looks good on Instagram. We need our students to be able to go, actually, yeah, that person does look happy, but I'm sure they're not happy at this current point in time. You know, who knows why they posted up that post. We also have Snapchat, a world full of filters. Everyone can look good on Snapchat. And Fortnite, a world full of Fortnites, where everyone is doing, you know, violent things, but we're somehow justifying that it's okay. So parents need to be aware that children learn a lot more from graphic sources now than in the past. There's no such thing as passive learning. You're always constantly learning. If you see an image, you are absorbing it into your brain. You may not use it straight away, but it's there in the back of your mind. So this person, this doctor, Dr. Kerry Freeman, had also said that children need to know more about the world than just what they can see and learn through text and numbers. Art education teaches students how to interpret, criticize, and use visual information and how to make choices based on it. And that's what we want. We want critical learners. Knowledge about the visual arts, such as graphic symbolism, is especially important in helping students become smart consumers and navigate a world filled with marketing logos. The most important thing, I think, at this point in time in our society and our life. My practice in class. So I do a few things, and I might do it differently to you, but that's okay. It doesn't mean that what I'm doing is better or what you're doing is like, this is just the way that I do things. So I always try and make sure that I cover this outcome, and it's art appreciation and art making. So I always link whatever I do to an artist. So for this program, I did a Georgia O'Keeffe study, and this artist looks at natural flowers, and she looks at different natural environments. And she really, like, her whole idea is that nobody looks at a flower and really, really focuses on it and sees the beauty of it. So I looked at her and I showed my students a few images of her work. And then we did some critical questions on it. We did some visual literacy questions. We looked and we studied about her. And then I linked it to Islamic pedagogy because, subhanAllah, even though she may not be Muslim herself, but her idea that, like, focusing and looking at a natural thing, a natural, you know, a flower, and really, like, appreciating it is so Islamic in a way. So it is Allah who has made for you the earth as a resting place and the sky as a canopy, and has given you shape and made your shapes beautiful, and has provided you sustenance. Thus, everything in this universe has been created beautiful with purpose and in proportion and measure, both qualitatively and quantitatively. The traces of divine wisdom and plan underpin each and every aspect of creation. So we unpack this. We talked about that when you see a flower, you say, Alhamdulillah, that you've seen this and appreciate it, because this is a beautiful thing that Allah has given you and has given us and has surrounded our world with this. And then once we move on with the Islamic pedagogy and we looked at our artists, and then I link it back to techniques. So we looked at, I showed them different techniques that you could do with watercolor. And then I also gave them a flower and they had to study it just as Georgia O'Keeffe did. And they produced some really amazing things. So that was really good. The next thing is a whole school approach. So we worked in collaboration with Casula Powerhouse Arts Centre and Liverpool Hospital. And basically what they gave us was these radiation masks. And these radiation masks were actually patient masks. They were worn by patients. And it's such a traumatic experience because these masks, if you think about it, were placed on this person's face and their top body they had to be screwed into like this bed and put through an MRI machine. And this went on for half an hour for 6 weeks. So imagine how claustrophobic that would feel and how traumatic that would be. So this mask, I think anybody who has gone through this process would experience, whenever they would see it, they would be like traumatized by this mask. So the whole idea, Casula Powerhouse, and I don't know who else was the creator, but I think it was someone in America. But the whole idea was to transform this mask and try and develop a more positive association with it. So 80 entrants have now gone into the exhibition. Alhamdulillah, we were able to successfully get in. So that was really good. And my students, all they did was like, they paper mached it and then they just decorated it and it just gave it a more positive association. So that was pretty awesome. And that's my students there, and they're very, like, just look at their faces here. Like, they're really, really proud and happy. When I first gave them the mask, like, they were so grossed out. They were like, I can't touch this. This is, like, a human has actually been inside this mask. So they were really grossed out by it. But towards the end, they just really loved and embraced the idea. And they loved the fact that once this mask was displayed in the gallery, that it would actually be sold and that money would go to charity. So they were really happy with that. And Islamic pedagogical principles and ATSL. So for ATSL, it's standard 1, know students and how they learn. I think that this is relevant to my practice because the way I would teach certain subjects, I would teach them visually because I do believe that students are visual learners. So that's me knowing that students are visual learners and I'm catering to them. We've got principles effective Islamic pedagogy. Teachers design learning activities that will inspire a sense of awe and wonder in students. 100%. Like, I would not even doubt that. When you give students, like my previous program, when they had to like look at a flower, that is putting in a sense of awe and wonder. They're really appreciating the Islamic world and Allah's creations, but also being really engaged in their learning and they're experiencing that wonder and excitement in learning. Okay, and I wanted to finish off with a few things. And how can we make art easy to teach for everyone? Because it's scary. It really is. I mean, like, if you don't know much about it and you're not somebody who is part of that world, you'd look at it and think, that's so foreign to me. Like, why would I go there? You know? So visit galleries and get to know the art world. That's like my really strong advice. It's not scary. It's not what we kind of imagine that people are like, yes, there are hipsters there, but it's not scary. Speak to colleagues. You know, if you know somebody who is strong at a certain subject, it doesn't have to be art. It could be like anything, like PE. If you know that there's someone in school that is like really strong in that subject, speak to them and get to know their advice. Access initiatives and programs from local art galleries such as Casula Powerhouse, MCA Art Gallery of New South Wales. I say Casula Powerhouse because it is your closest gallery at the moment. So I think, yeah, like from distance-wise, it is the closest one. And that initiative that I showed you is free and it's easily accessible to anybody. So definitely use the resources that we have and ask for those things. And they're all happy to promote the love of art. Like the people at Casula Powerhouse, they were so happy to be part of a community and help out and really like promote the love of art because they all feel the same way. We live in a connected world and there are lots of places where you can access ideas and inspiration from, such as Instagram and Pinterest. There's a lady on YouTube and Instagram. She's so amazing. Like, she's my idol when it comes to art. She's like the best art teacher ever. I think her name is Cassie Stevens. Have a look at her work. Like, she makes art so engaging and she comes in dressed as an artist. She really, really engages the students. And make it simple. Minimize stress. Like, if you're going to give them an activity, don't give them every single color under the sun. Just give them whatever color you need. So really simplify the activity so you don't have to worry about mess and cleaning because it is hard. I mean, it's messy. It's not an easy thing to teach. But I use people, like have students, let them have a job, use your resources. We're very lucky that some of the classes already have taps, so it's easier to access. I mean, some schools don't have that, which is really hard. And give students jobs, which, as I've just said, and have fun and be involved with it. When you're involved, the students will thrive and they will see that you're happy and they will ultimately be part of all of that. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for listening. Any questions? Okay, so the question was, what has stood out for me in my career teaching visual arts? That's a really good question. I would say that my experience at Casula Powerhouse has been the most, because I did work there for a short period of time, and I thought that was, I think, the best, because as I said, like, you've got to immerse yourself in the world that you want to be in. So I really, once I started working there, then I really got to know how to access programs and how to get my students to be really involved in the whole conceptual understanding of art. So that, I think, was, the best thing for my career, yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, so that's a really good question. And the question was, I'm just going to summarize it. How would you like quantify or like grade an artwork for a student? For me, I would look at effort. That's what I would be like, if I had it my way, but we don't always have it that way. I would be looking at the student's effort. Like, if a student tried their hardest, like, let's say if it's out of a 5, I would give them a 5, you know, whereas some students, like, they don't really care. So I would look at effort rather than the actual end product, because they might look at an artwork, they may have produced something and have said, this is the best thing I've ever done. You know, I've put in so much effort into this and it's the best thing, and I'll look at it and go, you know, it's a C. You know, it's not fair. You know, because to them it's an A. To them it's a 5 out of 5. Who am I to then go and say, sorry, that's not an A. It's not fair. So I would look at effort. Any other questions? Yes. So the question was, are we able to explore Islamic art in the Islamic sector? Yes, 100%. Because there's so much that you can do with Islamic art. You can look at the geometric patterns. I mean, the architecture of mosques, like, all of that is so powerful, and it's relevant to the students in Islamic schools. So that means they're able to really gain a lot of meaning from it. So yeah, definitely 100%. It's not like it would be different to teaching a different type of art, but it's definitely possible. Definitely possible. Any other questions? So the question was, if there do class numbers and class sizes affect the quality of teaching? And yes, it does. It does. Like, to put it honestly, it does. But there's ways around it. Like, I taught a printmaking class last year, and I had like 30 students. So I had half of the class working on the printmaking, and I was with them, and the rest of the class were doing like the same topic, the same artist, but we were looking at a different way of doing it. So they were doing like a drawing of it. So I knew when I was working with those students that I could still see what other kids were doing. But that takes a lot of time to get to that point. So I wouldn't, with me, if I have just started off with a school, like with this school, like having just been new, I wouldn't do that because I don't think my students are ready. So I would do something like what I've just said at the end of the year, whereas when I have just walked into this school, I had to do something where I could control the whole class. So that's why we did watercolor, and I had to do directed drawing and really like do the whole class thing, because they need to be kind of like scaffolded to get to that point. Okay, thank you so much for listening.